welcome to this fortnight's Detective Diaries, where I take you through some of the most interesting discoveries I've made in my house detective research. This fortnight, I'm going to take you through 5 of my favourite interstate houses. So although I'm based in Brisbane, I research houses all over Australia. And last episode, I took you through some of my favourite Queensland houses. This episode, we're going to travel to New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia so I can showcase some of the stories I've uncovered there. I hope you enjoy watching. Number 5. This takes us to the little town of Quorn in South Australia. If you're like me, you probably have no idea where Quorn is. I certainly didn't. It's sort of north of Adelaide in South Australia, and despite how it's pronounced, it's actually spelled Q-U-O-R-N. It was a fascinating town to research. I knew absolutely nothing about the history of this town when I got started, and I knew very little about the history of South Australia either. So I basically had to start from scratch, and that included learning about the different styles of houses in South Australia as well. And this is one of the things that I love most about my research. I'm constantly learning new things and expanding my knowledge of houses and architecture and history. The house is gorgeous. It's a stone house, which immediately sets it apart from most of the houses that I research in Queensland. And it was built in the late 1800s. That was really difficult to establish a date of construction. As I mentioned in last fortnight's video for rural properties and houses in small towns, this can be very difficult because there's simply not the same amount of records available as there are for houses that are in capital cities. However, I do know that it was most likely built by Robert Thompson. Now, Thompson was one of those guys that you see when you're researching history who had his finger in every single pie in the town, basically. He was a wheelwright by trade, so he started off from quite humble beginnings, but when he came to Australia, he was Scottish. When he arrived in Australia, he basically established a timber yard and a timber mill. When Robert relocated to Quorn, he took his business with him and established the Thistle Timber Yard. Thistle obviously being the Scottish national flower, so a tribute to his ancestry there. This business grew to be massive. He expanded into ironmongery, so hardware supplies, that type of thing, branched out into building properties as well, and that's why I suspect that he built this house that I was researching. But the business went gangbusters. He had a store on the main street in Quorn. A series of photos over time show just how much the business expanded in what it sold. He was even operating as the town's undertaker for a while, which surprisingly wasn't that uncommon for carpenters because they were making the coffins, so they often ran the side business as an undertaker. Robert was one of these amazing guys who was involved in everything in town as well as running his business. He was on the board of a heap of committees and involved in a lot of social organisations and that type of thing, and he actually was mayor of Quorn from 1894 as well. Now, Robert never lived at the house that I was researching, but from 1905 his son William did live there, and interestingly he established a poultry farm, and it was known as the Thistle Poultry Stud, so it sounds like it may have been an expansion of his dad's business as well. So he bred chooks on the property, and there's this great old newspaper photo that shows all the pens in the yard of the house with the house in the background. Unfortunately, it's not great resolution, but you get the idea of what this enterprise must have looked like. And William did very well for himself. He won a number of awards for his chook breeds over the years, and it ran for quite a long time. I think he moved into the house in 1905, and it ran for a couple of decades after that. So there you go, a chicken farm. That wasn't what I was expecting to uncover when I started researching this house. Number 4 takes us to Kew in Melbourne. When I first looked up the address of this house on Google and had a look at the street view, I was blown away. It's a freaking mansion. It's got a tower and everything. It's the most impressive looking house, so I absolutely couldn't wait to get started researching it. It was built by Michael Dowden in about 1889-1890, and the house was designed by architects Tappan, Gilbert and Dennehy. Now, interestingly, Michael actually married the sister of one of those architects, Elizabeth Tappan, and it was them who moved into the house after it was built. They christened the house St. Michael's, which seems a little bit vain on Michael's behalf, but perhaps there was another connection to St. Michael's. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Michael and Elizabeth lived in the house for many years, but the longest residents were actually Alfred and Jessie Sisson. Now, Alfred was a really interesting man. He had studied education and science at the University of Melbourne, and he graduated in 1915, right in the middle of the First World War. He was hired by the Department of Defence and travelled to Scotland, where he worked as a research scientist in a cordite manufacturing factory. So cordite was the explosive material that was being used in ammunition, shells, bullets, that type of thing at the time in the First World War. And it was here that he accidentally inhaled nitrogen peroxide gas, which apparently caused lifelong issues. When he returned to Australia, Alfred worked in the Victorian College of Pharmacy as a lecturer. He eventually became the dean, and he was connected with the university for over 42 years. He was so well connected to the university that a building was actually named in his honour. This building is now within the Monash University campus. He also had a mural named in his honour. This mural was designed by artist Leonard Anois, and it was completed in 1961. It's full of symbolism, and it's supposed to represent the evolution of medicine, pharmacy and science over the years, but also the evolution of the earth. And it's just a stunning mural, and what an amazing tribute to the life of this man. Number 3, Bellingen. This house was a fantastic example of the kind of information you can uncover if you're lucky to get in contact with a descendant of the owners or residents of a house, which is exactly what happened in this case. I was putting together a family tree on Ancestry, and I noticed that a lady had already put together a really detailed tree for the family that I was looking into. So I got in touch with this lady, and I got back more than I could ever have hoped for. Not only did she know exactly when it had been built and had old photos of it, but she had also visited the house as a child. She described it to me, and she was telling me about the layout of the house and the different rooms, and she mentioned that it was always really dark inside, that the floors were covered in lino, but also other less tangible things. Like she was telling me that Ernie's wife always had the wood-fired oven running in the kitchen, and that was where they boiled the water for their washing up and their laundry, because they didn't have running hot water. Even down to the fact that she remembers there was lines and lines of glass storage jars in the pantry for preserving fruits. All these other just little snippets of information that I never would have uncovered in any kind of documentary or archival resource. It was really great to get this first-hand information about the history of the house, and it really helped enrich the story for the current owners and paint a picture for them about what it was like originally. I also managed to put this descendant in touch with the current owners, and last I heard they were arranging for the descendant to come and have a look at the house next time she visits. So that to me just was so fantastic to make that connection between past and current owners. Number 2. This takes us to the suburb of Kensington in Sydney, which gets its name from the Kensington estate. The estate was named because they were trying to aspire to the genteel suburb of Kensington in London. The estate was subdivided in about 1890. A huge part of the Kensington estate was bought by George Todman, and he divided part of the land to be residential, but then on another huge section of the land measuring about 35 acres, he actually established a tobacco factory. And it was quite a remarkable factory because it was sort of like the old school English model of a factory, where it wasn't just the main operating buildings, but the owners also supplied social and sporting facilities for the workers as well. So in addition to the factory itself, there was a cricket oval, there was hockey fields, there was a netball courts, there was a whole range of sporting facilities, but also there was a strong focus on the social lives of the workers and their families as well. So they often organised outings, concerts and entertainment, that type of thing. So it was really quite a remarkable facility, although there's no looking past the horrible history that tobacco has in terms of slave labour and damage to the environment and, as we well know, terrible health consequences of smoking it. However, if you just look at the factory itself, it's quite interesting. But back to the residential part of Todman's development, he actually had covenants on the land so that any purchasers of the land had to build a house of either brick or stone, and it had to be worth over £300. So he was essentially being a bit snobby and basically saying we only want upmarket houses here and wealthy residents. The Stone family were just such residents. They purchased a block of land in Todman's part of the estate in 1912 and built themselves a house on their block almost immediately. They, interestingly, also built stables at the back of the house, which survive to this day. And one of the things the current owners wanted me to find out was why there were these massive stable blocks at the back. When I was looking into Charles Stone, who had bought and built the house, he was actually a milkman. So he would have been delivering his milk by horse and cart and would have needed somewhere to put his horses, hence the stables at the back of the house. Number 1, this house is in Fitzroy North in Melbourne, and interestingly it too has a stables building at the back and a connection with the early dairy industry. The house was built in about 1895 to 1898 by the Ashton family, and they also built a dairy and stables at the back of the house around the same time. It's difficult to imagine these days, but these backyard small dairy suburban operations were actually quite common in this era. This was because there was no such thing as refrigerated transport yet, so milk had to be sourced from the cows and delivered to customers within a really localized area because it just couldn't travel that far without going bad. So small backyard operations like the Ashtons established were actually not that uncommon. The Loudon family were the next owners of this property, and they also continued to run the dairy operations in the backyard, and remarkably they kept it running until right into the 1970s. There's a great photo of the outside of the dairy building at the rear of the house, and you can just see some ghost signage that says dairy and Loudon under it, which is a remarkable surviving tidbit of the history of this property. There's also another great photo that shows one of the Loudon sons in his World War II uniform, and he's standing in front of a sign that says dairy out in front of the house. Now this house is it's pretty fancy. It's got a lot of decoration on it and the style is quite grand, so it would have cost quite a bit of money for the Ashton family to build. So this to me indicates that their dairying business was actually quite successful. Remarkably, not only does the house survive, but the dairy and the stables in the backyard do too, which, that's just incredible evidence of these early backyard suburban dairies that operated in Melbourne. I hope you enjoyed hearing about my top 5 favourite houses that I've researched outside of Queensland and the stories that I uncovered about them. Thank you very much for watching. If you would pretty please click the like and subscribe button, I'd be very grateful as it really helps grow my channel. And I'll see you next time.